Hey folks, I'm Brown Bear. Blizzard recently announced that they're developing a remastered version of StarCraft Brood War. I've noticed a decent amount of uncertainty in the responses to this announcement, so I wanted to put together a quick video answering some of the most common questions. This video is directed primarily at people who play online multiplayer, especially the ranked ladder. The reason I'd like to do this goes back to the heart of why I started writing about game design. Back in the beginning of 2014, I'd almost quit computer games entirely. Each new title seemed less interesting and less enjoyable than the one before it. I thought I had just reached that age when you outgrow playing video games. By chance, I happened to play through Dark Souls II and was shocked to discover one of the best games I'd ever played. It was absolutely incredible and hooked me in a way that I hadn't felt in almost a decade. I realized that I wasn't very good at knowing what kinds of games I liked. Without this understanding, it was really hard to consistently find good titles. And even when I did find a game that appealed to me, there was always a feature or two that really bothered me and kind of ruined the whole experience. Learning more about game design was incredibly cathartic. I was able to better appreciate my favorite titles, let go of could have or should have beens, and see past the flaws within games rather than getting hung up on them. I started making videos to help other people find this clarity. I think this is especially useful in the real-time strategy genre. These games can be really complex, and I've been playing them for almost 20 years. I'll be providing my perspective on a few different questions in this video. I recommend that you watch from beginning to end. However, for the convenience of folks who prefer to jump around, I've provided timestamps to major talking points in the description below. Number 1. How will my rank in StarCraft II transfer over to Brood War Remastered? Let's start by discussing how rank works in StarCraft II. Your league, like Silver or Gold or Masters, is percentile based. For instance, Platinum means that Battle.net thinks you're better than 50% of people playing the competitive ladder. Diamond means that you're better than 73%, Masters 96%. In order to determine a percentile, you first need to sort players from best to worst. Battle.net does this using a matchmaking rating, or MMR. If 50% of the population is at or below a given MMR, that MMR becomes the boundary between Gold and Platinum. MMR can also be used to predict outcomes in a given match. For instance, being 315 MMR points above someone means that Battle.net thinks you have a roughly 3-to-1 chance of beating them. So how does this translate to Brood War Remastered? Well, you didn't just wake up one day with a specific MMR. You practiced and developed enough skill to be better than a certain percentage of the population, resulting in your current league. Brood War Remastered will work exactly the same way. If you practice and develop enough skill to be better than 50% of the player population, you'll end up in the Platinum of Brood War, or whatever the equivalent is in the ranking system they end up using in that game. People have a tendency to make this a lot more complicated than it actually is. It's true that at the professional level there are a variety of factors that affect performance. However, for 99% of players, it really just comes down to how much you practice and how much effort you put into finding and fixing your own mistakes. Practice more than other people, and you'll eventually be better than them. One caveat is that right at the start, there's a whole bunch of different factors that will influence your initial rank. Some people will grasp it faster than others, some people will be old veterans, and so on. In the long run, the only thing that'll matter is how much you practice. Number 2. Will any of my StarCraft II skills, for instance micromanagement, transfer over to Brood War? Yes and no. Like I just mentioned, in the long run it really just comes down to how much time you spend practicing Brood War. Every RTS game is different, and the better you get, the less overlap there'll be. However, how much difficulty you have learning Brood War will depend on how you played StarCraft II. One of the unique features of real-time strategy games is that it's possible to win without ever having been in a winning position. Meaning, your opponent might have macroed better and controlled their units correctly, but you took advantage of a distraction and destroyed their whole army while they weren't looking. In the short term, you benefit from this. You developed a skill that helped you win that particular game. In the long term, they benefit from this. They developed skill sets that increase their chances of winning all of their future games. I call these off-ramps. Timings, all-ins, cheeses, dirty tricks, all the ways that you can win without actually being the better player. Learning how to win and take an off-ramp is absolutely a skill worth learning. Otherwise, you might start feeling that your improvement in skill never translates on the ladder. By contrast, if you spend all of your time trying to win games instead of developing real skill, a couple bad things will happen. One is that the game will feel very random and coin flippy. Your matchmaking rating will be a lot higher than your fundamentals would suggest, meaning that situations that should be even will feel really lopsided because you're getting matched with people who are way better than you. This is frustrating, and in my view one of the sources of balance complaints. People cheese their way up the ladder and then don't understand why they can't win macro games. The second is situations like Brood War Remastered. Fundamentals tend to transfer better from game to game relative to game-specific skills like particular timings. If your playstyle in StarCraft II emphasized foundational skills, then you'll probably have an easier time adjusting to Brood War compared to someone who cheeses in every game they play. This might seem like a minor point, given how infrequently a new real-time strategy game gets released. Personally, I see it as a great opportunity. If you're a fan of this genre, I think it makes sense to learn how to make the most of it. Boosting your rank off of cheeses and then getting crushed by better players anytime you find yourself in a macro game just doesn't seem optimal. This falls under the category of learning how to maximally enjoy things, like learning how to savor a nice steak instead of wolfing it down. RTS games are a lot more enjoyable if you learn how they actually work, if you exercise all of their mechanics instead of just a select few. New releases are a great opportunity to change your thinking here. In the long term, I think you'll end up a lot more satisfied. Number 3. I'm worried that Brood War's user interface is outdated and hard to use. This is a concern that comes up with a lot of older games. The thing to realize is that all games, old and new alike, are built as a cohesive product. The user interface, menus, gameplay, networking code, and so on are all intended to work together. The Brood War interface was designed for Brood War gameplay, and it does a great job at it. Where you might start to notice deficiencies is the competitive ladder, in particular if you try to climb to the top. The thing to pay attention to is that the game never forces you to push the interface past its designed use cases. You only need to do so if you want to beat opponents at higher levels of the ladder. That might sound like semantics, but the key here is intent. Most people who play real-time strategy games just play the campaign, or they do comp stomps, or they jump into custom games. They don't play the competitive mode, because playing the game well is really hard. If you individually make the choice to play competitively, and you individually make the choice to try to climb the ladder to the point where the user interface is limiting, then you bear the responsibility for the ramifications of those choices, not the title itself. That's actually really empowering. It's surprising how cathartic it can be to make a choice very consciously and intentionally. Once you've considered the trade-offs and decided that the benefits outweigh the costs, you find yourself accepting the flaws for what they are, rather than getting hung up on them. Sometimes you even stop seeing them as flaws, and instead view them as trade-offs. The limited interface has a surprising amount of benefits, like the shift in focus to basic, easy tasks. Conversely, if you decide that the benefits don't outweigh the costs, you'll find that you'll never regret your decision not to do something, no matter how appealing the benefits might be. Number 4. What race should I play? I recommend that you experiment with all 3 races. Try to get a feel for each one, watch some professional games, and see how things play out. After a couple weeks, pick your favorite and stick with it. You won't get a perfect understanding over that short period of time, but you'll be able to make a much more informed decision, and this will likely benefit you in the long run. The reason I suggest picking one to begin with is that there's a huge amount of depth and complexity to each race in StarCraft. It can be hard to appreciate that if you're constantly switching from race to race. The balance that you should try to strike is having enough understanding of the races to know which one you prefer, while simultaneously diving deep enough into your favorite to fully appreciate all of its quirks and complexities. Number 5. Should I play StarCraft II or Brood War Remastered? Many folks offer the simple answer that you should play whichever one you find more fun, or that you should just play both. Humbly speaking, I don't agree with this perspective, for a couple different reasons. On a philosophical level, I think if you're going to spend hours and hours doing something, you should have an intellectual awareness and understanding about why you're doing it, and what you're getting out of it. This can have a transformative effect on how you engage with your hobbies, and even change what kinds of hobbies you have. This goes back to our previous discussion about the user interface, and taking design features at face value instead of getting hung up on them. On a more practical level, I've noticed a common thread in a few different areas of my life, from work to learning a second language to playing computer games. The folks who get burned out and frustrated always seem to be the ones who have the least understanding about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what it does for them. As a result, I've started to believe that human beings really benefit from self-awareness and self-understanding. It does something positive for us psychologically. For instance, I'd argue that StarCraft II is the answer to the question, what does a competitive real-time strategy electronic sport look like with a modern user interface? As part of their response, the designers chose features like multiple building select, smart pathing, smart casting, unlimited unit selection, and so on. Streamlining the user interface means reducing a lot of hard, redundant actions down to a few simple ones. On the lower end of the ladder, this has the potential to make the game boring. To see this for yourself, try playing on normal speed. On the higher end, it has the potential to create a permanently imbalanced metagame, because strategic balance rests on the assumption that the skill ceiling is unreachable. StarCraft II is a brilliantly designed game, so naturally the designers came up with a pretty straightforward solution. Make the game run faster, and jack up the DPS of all the units, among other things. This solves both the balance and boredom problems mentioned previously. But it's also very punishing. You can lose your whole army almost instantly if you're not careful. In older games, you couldn't even move your whole army, let alone lose it instantly. This is a trade-off. The benefits of a modern interface and fast, exciting gameplay weighed against the costs of punishing interactions. The point isn't whether or not the benefits outweigh the costs. The point is that both benefits and costs simultaneously exist. This is the reason I'm skeptical of the line of thinking that says, just play the one that's more fun. Every player on the competitive ladder will encounter trade-offs like this one, meaning every player will encounter frustration. Whether or not it's worth it depends on their personal preferences. Understanding the game better can really help with that. For instance, recognizing that gameplay systems are interdependent and that something you really dislike is dependent on something that you really enjoy can help you appreciate it for what it is, rather than getting bothered by it. For me personally, this is how I came to enjoy getting cheesed. I thought about it and realized that early game all-ins contribute to mid-game strategic depth and facilitate player creativity. I wrote a whole article on it. I've linked it in the description below. One of the great things about competitive esports is how the more you play and understand them, the more you enjoy them. Playing different games, thinking about how they work and what you like about them, and just generally being thoughtful of how you spend your time will pay off in the long run, at least in my opinion. For instance, I bet a lot of people would be less frustrated with the DPS of units in StarCraft II if they reminded themselves that this is part and parcel with a more modern, convenient user interface. Realizing things like this can be surprisingly cathartic, make the flaws in your favorite games all but disappear. Maybe in the end, you'll pick one, or maybe you'll pick both. Either way, you'll be happy with your choice. If you're interested in a more in-depth take, I wrote a long article contrasting StarCraft II with Brood War. You can find a link in the description below. Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed this video, please consider following me here, or on Twitter and Facebook to receive regular content updates. The relevant links are in the description below. All the best, and see you next time.